All right, without further ado, I now invite the Prime Minister to deliver their speech. Here.
Hi. Can I check that I'm audible and visible?
Yes to both.
All right, give me a second to pull up my timer.
Sorry, hold on. Can we get, our partner apparently isn't in the Zoom meet yet. Can we get maybe 10-20 seconds? Sorry.
All right, sure. I'm sorry for the interruption, Prime Minister, but we'll just have a few seconds.
Yep, sure, no problem. You don't want your Zoom.
Hello, I'm very sorry, but he's here now. Thank you.
All right, cool. Prime Minister, you can begin.
All right. All right, okay. Give me a moment. Our problem in today's debate is that the most vulnerable groups of people in society are not able to uplift themselves or view life in a positive light because of their suffering. And thus, our end goal in today's debate, we would like to request for side opposition to note the distinction. Firstly, to protect the vulnerable, and these look like the minorities and those from vulnerable groups, such as people who have faced trauma in their lives. Second of all, for individual motivation, for any individual to be able to view life in a positive light and to constantly improve themselves. So, what does the world of Amor Fati in general change or look like in life, and what does this philosophy bring about? So first of all, let's take a look at the purpose of philosophy in general. It is to introduce people to a way of thinking about life, and it's usually to help them improve in life, right? And so what does the philosophy of Amor Fati specifically look like? It looks like a word that supports Amor Fati looks like generally, it is the inherent belief that everything has a purpose, and this purpose is positive. So this looks like people looking past the negative aspects of challenges, suffering, and what has happened. For example, while the situation of someone may be that they are poor, while the person may be unhappy that they are suffering as a poor person, they may see it as a stepping stone to provide them the opportunity to take a first-hand look into what the poor faces, and hence in the future, when they grow up, they can take up a job that goes back to help the poor because they have been through the suffering and they can empathize with those who are suffering. And hence, because of this, the suffering was a good thing that acted as a motivator for them to succeed in life and go back to help more people that they empathize with, right? So here's a clarification. It does not look like the people thinking that the suffering itself is good, but rather that acknowledging that the suffering itself is bad, but in the grand scheme of things, it brings positive outcomes. So this philosophy also looks like people embracing the life that they were born into, because everything that happens in life was either good or necessary, and people not feeling unhappy about negative things in their lives, such as setbacks, challenges in their situation, because they think it happened for reasons. And this philosophy is already used in status quo such as religions. So why this philosophy will be so influential? Firstly, minorities are already inculcated with such ideologies that they are inhibited by social structures and rich people exploit them, etc. And these minorities already denounce these social structures and actively try to break them, which usually uses this the philosophy of Amor Fati to tell themselves that this all happened for a purpose, and they are able to use this as a motivation to break out any negative cycle, because there was a reason why they were put in such a negative cycle, perhaps to show themselves that they can break through these challenges because of their own willpower and strength. So why should suffering be seen as good or necessary? Firstly, what suffering even look like? It tends to cause people to lose morale. It causes people to give up on their dreams, values, and hopes easily. And so suffering on outside would then hold even greater value, because now we are giving it a value that rather we're not dismissing it in our lives as something that just is a part and parcel of life, but rather it's something that was inherently good and necessary and drives is a driving force in your life to move forward. So moving on to my first argument about improving the morale of minorities. So what does status quo look like? The poor feel that for example, the poor feel that their success is based on fate, and that's what society tells them from the minute that they are born. If you are born into a poor family, you will forever stay poor. These people will wallow in self-pity that their life is terrible, and society themselves will tell them that their situation is bad and that they can never get out of their situation of being in a poor family. So how does Amor Fati inherently help the minorities? Firstly, it provides the minorities with hope, because now they are able to take a look at the sufferings they've been through, take a look at it and say, hey, this was necessary for me to understand that my life situation may have been bad, but because of this, it has driven me forward to work even harder, 10 times harder than those people who perhaps have everything handed to them on a silver platter, and now they're better able to go out there and to strive for improvement so that they can give back to their community as well. And second of all, this Amor Fati philosophy also reduces burnout within these minorities and poor people, because now these people are more likely to have a driving force that keeps them going, rather than thinking that they're going through this suffering for nothing and that this suffering will not bring them any benefits, but rather it's just an inherent harm that they have to go through because of their unchangeable fate. So why is this the best way to help these minorities to change their fate? We see that without thinking that suffering is good or necessary, minorities cannot use the suffering as a motivation to improve their situation. The basis of suffering is that suffering tends to hold people back, destroy the morale, and give people the impression that the suffering is unfair towards themselves. And hence, because of this, it creates a mental block that they will never be able to succeed. And only with this life philosophy that the whole purpose of it is to change this perspective of life, they will no longer have this mental block, and instead they will be willing to put in the hard work to change and turn their situation around, right? So moving on to wealthy people. What do wealthy people do in status quo? Philanthropists that donate actively to charity organizations would continue to donate to charity organizations only because it amplifies the feelings of superiority. It helps them feel like they're helping a very helpless group and make them feel like they are a good person, right? So why do rich people now are more likely to help poor people when they follow Amor Fati? We further amplify the feelings of superiority by making them more incentivized to donate. How is this so? Firstly, we increase the value placed upon suffering. And so these richer people feel great that they have defied the fate, i.e. a lot of rich people like to brag about how they were once poor when they were younger, and thus they will also want to help other people defy their fate by giving back to their community when they are able to succeed in life and go back to their community and show them, hey, I succeeded because of all these motivations I had when I was poor, right? So moving on to my second argument about improving the morale of vulnerable groups, i.e. people that once experienced trauma. So in the status quo, these vulnerable people are only able to wallow in self-pity as well, and they cannot break out of a negative cycle because they have experienced this trauma and they think that this trauma was something so inherently negative to their life and that they were never able to really get out of this self-pity phase, because they didn't think that they will wonder, why did this happen to me? Why was I chosen to go through this trauma? So Amor Fati inherently helps these people, because now these people are going to take a look at the traumas that they have went through and say, hey, this was necessary for me to improve myself, to get through this personal growth, to get through this challenging period and to emerge stronger than ever. And thus, this is the best way, because the trauma patients go through such severe situations that they are no longer able to ensure that they can get through this tough situation without this entire philosophy that is being pushed by the entire society on such a grand scale. For all these reasons, I've never been prouder to propose.
All right, thank you, Prime Minister. I now invite Leader of Opposition.
Hello. Can I just be heard?
Yes, you are audible.
Okay, thank you. Hold on. I'm just gonna turn my camera on. Give 1 second. Okay. Hold on. All right. I'll take my POI's through voice and pronouncing session. Okay. I'll start my speech then in 3, 2, and 1. There are so many ways to ruin a life. A life is not only lost when your heart stops beating, but your life is also lost when you live a life that is simply not worth living. A couple of rebuttals before I start my speech. The government says that everything has a purpose and that is positive. We just want to point out that they might find bad life experiences as good, but we vehemently reject the notion that it's a good thing for these individuals to find them as positive. And also, government also says the second thing, that minorities need to see good in an issue to change. I just want to talk about why they change. They change because they want to. They know that this is not right. They know that this is not a way of life. Which we think it gets far worse on government on proposition side, when they simply accept that all things like oppression have good to it. Now let's talk about how pieces set up. Firstly, to make sense of this debate, we would like to say that on both sides there are significant amounts of narrative and how people are affected by these narratives. Because of this debate isn't on every different circumstance, but rather should be debated on the idea of Amor Fati, understanding what ideas are inherently good to humans and what inheres in the human condition. And secondly, what makes a person a person. We'll explain the moral framework we'll have to debate on and why it's the one that we default towards. A, we say in all circumstances it should be what humans instinctively want or desire. This may be their dreams, aspirations, or desires, specifically because on our time on earth is short and we can only achieve what we want in life as we are the only ones who can pursue our desires. B, we also default to maximizing human autonomy because of what we mentioned previously. There's a prerequisite of being happy is the capability to pursue happiness and what you want to do in life. And why is this what the debate should be about? For 3 things. Firstly, our circumstances may be different. We say that everyone has an active right to pursue what they desire because it is intrinsic to human nature. Because of this, we say that they should actively reject what they want and what they don't want to happen to them in the first place. And secondly, people who believe in Amor Fati are actively rejecting their desires because people have to accept their circumstances. We say that on opposing side that these circumstances shouldn't have any bearing on the person's wants and needs in their life. And thirdly, lastly, we say that your life is what you decide for yourself. We said it is better that if you seize the day and what you want to do, than to accept your circumstances. This is what we're doing on opposition side. Now let's talk about our counter model. Our counter model is simple. We prefer status quo, where people can still choose to fight against the things that happen to them. And even if they did not have the control over these things, we still let the people dream and let them fight for a better tomorrow and let them fight dignified lives. How? I'll give you 4 reasons. Firstly, we say that it is normal to suffer. The difference is they say that it's normal to suffer. The difference is we say it's not normal. We say that they should pursue what they want to do. And it's unclear how they're going to work harder on government side because they see suffering as normal. What they should experience in the first place. And if you don't believe that, the reason people to work hard is they believe that they can get out of their situation in the first place. We give that hope to them in the first place. And fourthly, even if they get hope from suffering, we say they're far more content with that suffering and make their own personal situation affect them as far as or how they dream. This is not what we do in our state. And now moving on to my first argument, the philosophy of Amor Fati is principally unjustified. The idea that people still have their own will and preference, this looks like them having choices on things that they want to do day by day and what they want to happen to them and what they want to do today. These choices make people because when you live your life, you should be the only person who can have control over it, over your actions and choices, because it is you who will feel the pain and grief and consequences that happens when you choose to do these actions. You can't take it away from people in general because people will suffer and get the benefit because again, people in themselves have their own autonomy. So what does this mean then? In the larger perspective, it looks like people have being the one to take the wheel of what will happen to them in their lives. On our world, we fight for the freedom of choice and autonomy that is inherently unlikely equated on Gov's side because people would choose to not question reality but instead choose to go on with it. In Gov's world, fate creates choice on people. At all, we would rather people having this power instead. So why is autonomy extremely important on our side? We say that in government's best case, they may have some forms of autonomy, but we say in many cases, these forms of autonomy are principally unjust. 3 reasons why. Firstly, it is those who are born into intergenerational wealth who can impose their desires because they have power. This means that those who can only opt their autonomy and accept that they can pursue what they want is already in good circumstances. We say that we shouldn't let circumstances be a barrier. And even if they have some sort of autonomy, it is still a fabricated source of autonomy because we say that the world is imperfect insofar as you adapt to the things that will happen to proximate to you and you mold your dreams and desires based on your circumstances. Insofar as that's the case, you cannot get true autonomy on government side if it isn't what you dictate for yourself or if it isn't what you want. That's unjust. At their best, where everyone can pursue what they want. What's the point of philosophy? What's the point of the philosophy of Amor Fati? You should maximize your desires even if you're content with now because it is still the intrinsic to your nature. If it is unjust to stop you now and stop you further because it's philosophy that tells you to stop dreaming. In conclusion, we say that human human dignity is tied to what you want as a person and what your capability to attain that would be. Amor Fati attacks that in two ways. Firstly, the first is rejecting human desires and human nature. Secondly, is the acceptance of mediocrity and the undermining of autonomy. This argument explains that it is an irrevocable desire for humans to do what they want. Government side needs to provide they're able to pursue the desires when they're ultimately undermine them. This is debate winning because it simply explains in all circumstances we reject the philosophy of Amor Fati because it directly goes against human dignity and human nature. Let's talk about the second argument. Government firstly said that people should accept the life they are born into. For people to actually do something, they want to be emotionally attached to it. They need to have the change to will it. You simply can't accept this when you allow your fate to happen to you. Simply what we would rather is people having desire to change. How people get a bigger shock to change is because they want to now. People are driven to change to a higher extent where they change and they don't need to change when they're forced to the higher extent. Meaning people aren't born in a life of oppression. So what do we mean by this? We mean by simply upholding Amor Fati in your life, you simply accept the consequences it upholds. I'll talk to you about two consequences. Firstly, on social movements. What do we mean by social movements? When we're talking about the LGBTQ plus movement, the BLM movement, the feminist movement. The consequence this provokes is the idea when you simply choose to accept that oppression is good or at the very least necessary. The likelihood is people won't question it. They will simply have a life that accepts oppression. Or what this will do for the movement. The one simple thing it does is slow it down because people now are going to opt out of fighting against oppression because people are going to opt out of it or simply are going to opt out of trying to fight it even when the system the system imposed was inherently not their fault or choice. That is, even actions outside of people's control are also consequences that happen when you accept Amor Fati. So why is this such a harm? It is for the simple fact that in government's world, when you support the fact that oppression is so much worse on the government side and you slow down the movement. I'll just say this quickly in the pause. Example, in the feminist movement, if someone is impregnated, they're also so much more likely to keep the baby because they will simply think that there's a reason this happened, that this was good and this was necessary in their lives. Now let's talk about innovation. So how does innovation happen? Innovation happens because some people saw the need for more. Some people saw the need that things were happening to them, i.e. allowing rain to fall on their heads. That's how people made the umbrella, something that was made for the simple fact that people saw something to them and they sought the change, which is far more likely to happen again on our side because again people will simply see people will see things, or because that's likely to not happen on Gov side because people will see things and just think it's good and you will think it's okay. So innovation remains stagnant, meaning whatever we enjoyed in the world today will get worse than the day tomorrow. So what the harms is very simple. The harms is simply we have stagnation, and sure Gov might say that they have some innovation, but it's not to the point of which we have to, when we're proceeded to accept these things as necessary and good. So why are all of these likely to happen in Gov's world? It is for the simple fact when you raise someone up from a young age, when you teach them to accept everything that life throws at them and view it as good, you've locked this person. You've trapped them into the acceptance that everything, including oppression and the life they are born in, is good and necessary. We think you lose this and we think you lose the pursuit of change when this happens. So speaker, if you really want to stand for a world where people are not shackled to the idea of accepting everything is inherently okay, where they accept the stagnation of innovation, accept the idea of oppression, which we think here at OP is not a way of life. We don't think people should live in a world where they are oppressed and constrained to not do anything about it. You stand to oppose, and I cannot be prouder to oppose.
All right. Thank you, Leader of Opposition. I now invite Deputy Prime Minister.
Hi, everyone can hear and see me, right?
Yes, you're audible and visible.
Okay, hang on. Let me pull out a timer, please. I like POIs in chat, please. Women would not be emancipated if they didn't believe that their suffering was necessary for the success of the feminist movement, because it was a stepping stone to tell them that they could succeed. I think that opposition creates a deterministic view for vulnerable groups that they will never be able to break out of a cycle of disenfranchisement and discrimination because suffering can therefore be discredited. Two things I'll be proving in this debate. First of all, how we help the most vulnerable groups, and secondly, how we protect individual motivation. But before I move on, I'd like to make a quick clarification here. On our side, suffering is not seen as normal. It's seen as necessary. I think that it's very weird that proper opposition tells us that suffering seen as normal is a bad thing, because I think that this problem also affects them on their side, because suffering still exists on their side. It doesn't mean that just because I reject my fate and I think that this is something that I can use as a stepping stone to get further, doesn't mean that suffering doesn't exist. Therefore, I think that we take that out already. But furthermore, I'd also like to deal with this thing of autonomy. I think that this is the bulk of their case. I'll be dealing with this more directly in my speech. But they say that people will mold their dreams based on their circumstances, and therefore they inherently shortchange themselves. I think that this argument is premised on the fact that people will buy into their circumstance and accept their fate. Because viewing my life events as necessary doesn't mean that I accept my fate. This is unlikely on our side because we promote a growth mindset that every setback is a stepping stone. This is the thing that is exclusive to suffering being seen as necessary. I think it's less likely that poor people will accept their fate on our side. And conversely, on their side, poor people, and vulnerable groups, they actually bemoan the world. There isn't actually any improvements. I think that their LO didn't deal with this. So on to my first question on how we help the most vulnerable people. I think that first of all, Joanne told you about vulnerable groups. This looks like people who have historically been discriminated against or disenfranchised. For example, women, disabled people, LGBTQ people, or minorities. I think that they wanted to talk about autonomy, but this directly deals with their argument of dignity and autonomy. Because I think that first of all, I think that people are likely to already historically have had their suffering denied. Because suffering denied, because I think of historical things like colonialism, where people like majorities simply just didn't care about the things that people were facing, and therefore they've already been denied. I think that furthermore, Joanne also told you that it's better to view trauma objectively on our side, where suffering is seen as something necessary. If not, I think that the alternative in opposition looks like suffering on opposition becoming a lot more personal. So it's seen that suffering is a result of you being unlucky rather than something that's necessary for you to become a better person. Furthermore, I also like to deal with the argument of people keeping their baby. I think that this is actually contradicting themselves here, right? Because I think that when they talk about people keeping their baby, they actually admit that suffering is necessary. Suffering of pregnancy is necessary in order for you to have a baby, which is probably a good thing to most people. So why do people feel like they can create change on our side? This protects vulnerable groups that we think are very important. Because I think that we flip their argument of emotional attachment. When people feel that suffering is necessary, people feel more attached to this thing because they feel that they can actually change their fate. And suffering is something that will actively build on the existing things that they have experienced. Therefore, I think that we actually have better emotion. Therefore, I completely agree that emotional attachment is a good thing, but I think we actually have that better on our side. Secondly, Joanne also told you about wealthy people. I think that the current narrative is that wealthy people believe that their success is due to fate. For example, suffering was not a prerequisite. This means that they develop a mindset that they are, for example, the chosen one or bigger than everyone else. Why is this true? I think most rich people generally experience very little suffering because they're born with a silver spoon. These are the world. I think therefore this means that they feel that they are better because simply they didn't have to experience the same amount of suffering as the majority had to do. So what does therefore I think that's I think that they don't really feel a need for them to help other people because they feel like this is all of a reason that they said this was their fate, and suffering is actually part of fate. I think what changes on our side is that these rich people, they try to help these vulnerable groups because it actually tells them that suffering is necessary. These rich people actively feel a need to uplift people because they feel that they can give these vulnerable groups a better life. And that's exactly why we actually get more change for vulnerable groups on our side. This the second question I'm going to do. Before I move on, I'll take a point. No point, I'll move on. The second question is how we protect individual motivation. The premise of this argument is that individuals are more likely to experience suffering in their life. I think the opposite of suffering is actually success. Why is this true? First of all, I think that there's a small locus of control and historical context, which I've been telling you about. Therefore, people cannot really control how much suffering they experience. Secondly, success is zero sum. For example, if someone gets a promotion, you don't get a promotion. Therefore, this actually wasn't over time due to population experience. And thirdly, I think that there's actually a hedonic treadmill, because even if individuals are not objectively suffering, they feel like they are. Because I think that people have been acclimatized to success. They feel like the good things that they're acclimatized to good things that you get in life, but you cannot get acclimatized to things like suffering. And the second thing is that they actively compare with people who are more successful. I think that on our side, the view that suffering is necessary is a stepping stone for them. This is what we've been pushing down the line. So why is it likely that on opposition people cannot take suffering well? I think this goes against the narrative that trying hard and never giving up is a good thing, because opposition tells people that they should give up because this notion has a cap to it. For example, you will never actually succeed because you're always failing, and therefore you should just stop trying because suffering is not unnecessary. Even if suffering doesn't exist, you wouldn't succeed either ways because suffering doesn't propel you to greater heights. I think that this is the narrative that opposition is looking at. So what is the impact? I think first of all, people actually feel a great sense of burnout. This is true because people feel like everything that they've done is null. This is bad because individuals don't want to take opportunities when it comes to them. For example, if an individual is given a job promotion, they feel that, oh, this suffering is not actually, it's actually an extra burden I'm taking on myself. This is not a suffering that's necessary that I have to take, and it's not something that will change my life drastically. And therefore, I think that they are very unlikely to take opportunities that comes to them. And second thing, I think that this directly deals with their argument of choice, because I think that opposition actually takes away choice because there's less motivation for them to work hard, right? That actually isn't an option because society tells you that suffering is not a thing. You actually take away the choice of people because people just don't feel like they need to work hard. So why is this better on proposition? I think that we prove to you two things. First, we actually have more sustainable motivation. When individuals suffer, they're more likely to try again. And the second thing is, I think it's more likely to achieve, people are more likely to achieve success when they try for a long time. Therefore, we remove one of the biggest reasons as to why people are motivated. For example, if I work for a very, very long time and I keep trying, ultimately I'll still get better at it and maybe I'll get a job promotion then. Therefore, please go with prop. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Deputy Prime Minister. I now invite the Deputy Leader of Opposition.
Hello, just a sec. Am I visible and audible?
Yes, to both.
Okay, great. Thank you. So before, okay. Pronoun she, her, she, a wifey voice. Starting my speech before that, just want to give a couple of people a shout out. I think this competition would not be possible without all of our families, the Ateneo Senior High School, and all of our friends in the Bay Quota Hustlers and Compost Heaps. So for all of that, thank you. So starting my speech then. In 3, 2, 1, go. The world revolves around people wanting the change in their lives. It is the idea that they want a hope for something even better than what is applicable for them now. And that's the reason why we're able to get development. We're able to find better ways to have better lives and all these things that are then in our hands. I think for all of that, you have to oppose on that level. A couple of clarifications I want to give. I think firstly, we have to idealize the reason that why suffering is not normal. And even if it's like going to happen on both of our sides, why it's not necessarily going to be necessary and why you need to validate this all the time. I think that firstly, it's incredibly soft for government to have to always like bring this up. I think that even if it's a necessity for people to face, I think that's still normal. But the idea then is that on government side, when you're going to constantly keep accepting this, it looks like you also saying that there's something that's genuinely good that's going to happen and therefore needed. But I think the idea and the wrong between this is the idea that people need to have this idea to also understand that everything that happens to them is not good. Because of this desire for something even better or understanding that something is bad, that's the reason why we have a driving force on our side. But secondly, even if it's not the case eventually, I think it also means that you also are going to normalize the need to suffer and all these things just to succeed, which is incredibly bad because we can still have our own intuitions to understand something that is bad before we actually commit it. I think it's really important to note. But let's actually talk about what like government tells you firstly. They talk to you how people can't take suffering on our side. We think that's completely untrue because on our side, we still have like bad things happening. But the idea then and the differentiation between us and government side is that we don't always want to keep on accepting it. This also looks like then on our side, we're trying to preempt things from happening. We don't want to accept everything that's likely to happen. That's why we're still going to have this extreme driving force to want to make people to stay away from things. I think on the higher level of this, it literally means then that people want to work even harder to get something that they want or get something that's far more better for them because they know that something is actually a lot much better for them and they deserve more. I think the idea then is that they are more motivated to believe that they can attain something or they have to attain something or they want to attain something. This driving force is something we can say is extremely exclusive on our side, given the fact that it is because of your circumstances that people are going to want to change things rather than you just constantly keep on accepting these things. I think this is the main determinant of motivation that you inherently want. I think it's extremely important. Let's go to the main clash then at like the debate so far. I think the main thing that like government tries to push to you is that bad things are going to happen. That's how we introduce problems. We think that bad things are inevitably going to happen on our side as well. The only difference is the perception of people between that. We tell you it's extremely unfair for like government to characterize their side to being like, oh, we need problems to happen for people to be introduced to them. But the idea is that bad things are going to happen on both sides. Government's burden is to believe then that all these things are good and therefore should be accepted. Our idea is that we want to preempt these things at the even like the slightest off like chance that you're able to like accept it and like see it in the like far future. We tell you these things literally mean then that people have a harder incentive to work for like something that they do not want. They're going to stay away from it. And that's the driving force of able to like give these people in the first place. We think at the higher level, we're able to give these people a lot more accountability of what's likely to happen to them. I think it's extremely important. Let's look at Amor Fati like really quickly, right? What does it look like in this term aspects? I think that firstly, it looks that Amor Fati means that people are going to completely accept everything that's going to happen to them because they believe it's necessary. Meaning that if even if they can see something is going to happen to them that's inherently bad, they aren't going to like completely like find a way to like completely avert their situation from that because they believe it's necessary. Meaning that in every action that is done, they're just going to believe that it's for the greater good of the future. We say that's ideologically very problematic. I think the first problem comes from Aki's speech, that these people do not have the entire idea that of taking away these people's autonomy from them in the first place. What does that look like? I think in the even greater idea of like society in general, it means that everything that's likely to happen to you is going to be accepted as valid and okay. I think that's extremely bad. Why? I think if people in general have the right of their own idea of what is good, personally going to be good for them or not, I think it's something we're highly able to get on our side because people are not just going to constantly keep accepting everything that comes to them. But on the even greater level, we think that this also means that people are going to like understand that this is something that they can have in their own hands, and therefore they're going to be a lot more proactive at this like in this rate. What does this mean then? I think it literally means that on government side, people are more likely to be like, simply just believe the oppression and climate change are inherently needed, therefore it must happen, instead of actually just trying to find a way to completely avert the entire situation away from that. Therefore, I think in the higher it stands to these things, it means there is no blame to people. There is, at the very least, not these things are being held accountable because they believe that it's needed for them to like survive and become better. We think it's inherently harmful on two scenarios. Firstly, on like bad events happening, we think at the point at which people personally believe that everything must happen for a problem to be introduced, like on government's world, every bad thing is just left unaccounted for. It means things like oppression are not going to be at the fault of people. It's just on the fault of fate itself. And because it's inherently bad, because at the point at which you cannot actually find the source of this bad thing happening, you will not find the development to actually work towards something even greater. You will not find this need to actually be a lot more proactive and to like do something a lot much better on our side. But secondly, we think at the times that you have good events happening to you as well, it's also extremely harmful. What does it look like then? I think this looks like people not understanding that it's because of them that they are like having good things happening to them. And this takes away, again, the people's individual encouragement to like develop more things and making a lot much better, to find more ways to make their lives a lot more convenient and things like that. It is because of these things that they're not going to want to strive for more. They're always going to be settling for the least possible thing possible because they're only depending on fate itself. I'll take POY right now.
Hi. If your line of argument is that when people feel that suffering is bad, they actively try to avoid suffering, then why are people likely to take opportunities on your side? Because these opportunities tend to be a jump that does actually create more suffering.
We're not saying that like we're inherently going to think that suffering is bad. The idea then is that we're trying to allow these people to understand that their autonomy so that they have a grasp towards. That means to say that if people want something greater, they have to understand that there is a need for these kinds of risks, rather than just accepting what comes at them. I think the idea of fate is also going to limit you from the things that you want, because you're always going to believe that you have to wait for an opportunity to come for you, rather than trying to grab them in the first step. I think it's extremely important. So let's weigh out like both of our terms, right, on like government opposition. I think the government has the idea that they're trying to stay in a very safe space. They want to take in what is likely to happen to them based off of like it being fate. Why is this then so much more harmful than compared to our side? Because we tell you on our side, it means that people can become people. They give them the unique ability to want to choose the lives that they want to live in comparison to any being on the world. I think because of this, the idea then is that people are more likely able to actually achieve what they want. They have a higher driving force to achieve this thing. But the very last and like worst point even possible, we're able to give them the encouragement that they actually need to strive for something even better. We say for all of these reasons, very proud to oppose. Thanks.
All right, thank you, Deputy Leader of Opposition. I now invite Government Whip.
Hi, can I be heard? Hi, can I be heard? Hello, can everyone hear me?
Okay, yes, you're audible and visible.
Thank you. Give me a moment to set up my camera. Sorry. Right, I'll be starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. We told you 2 things in today's debate. Firstly, we helped the most vulnerable groups. Their entire first speech was premised on the idea of autonomy. They haven't responded to this. Firstly, why people will be content in a terrible situation that they are in. Because firstly, rich people actively justify things like racism, discredit their suffering because they feel like they deserve what they already have, and that suffering is not necessary for success. We told you that this is true because rich people are usually born with a silver spoon in their mouth and inherently experience less suffering. And also, autonomy is a lot greater on our side because people feel that they hold a greater power in their hands. They cannot simply assert that suffering not being viewed as necessary creates greater autonomy. Meanwhile, we give you structural reasons as to why this is true. This is because the prerequisite of autonomy is for you to feel that you can actually create change. On opposition, suffering is a lot more personal because in disenfranchised communities, a lot of the reasons why they got changed was because they believed that their suffering was a stepping stone. So on that side, they've never really responded to the idea that people are going to bemoan about the world, and a lot of minorities view the idea of suffering as something that's inherently unfair towards them. This means they feel that they are very disenfranchised by society. It leaves them to have very low morale, and therefore on their side, it's very unlikely that these poor people want to change. Oh, sorry, I didn't state my POI references. By voice, please. I think the opposition takes away autonomy by invalidating these vulnerable groups because they have to defend the narrative that their suffering was not necessary. This means the opposition therefore contradicts themselves. They cannot defend vulnerable groups standing up for themselves and going against racism at the same time. Secondly, we protect individual motivations. This is the bulk of the second speaker. Note that we don't only have to defend suffering. Good things are likewise seen as necessary. This is important because it promotes the narrative that even if suffering exists, good things will definitely come in the future. This is a benefit that they cannot deny. I think that is the largest source of motivation for people, and it's a pretty positive thing. But we think that it's likely that people are going to be less motivated on that side. People feel that suffering is bad. They actively try to avoid suffering. So why are people likely to take opportunities on your side and likely to take things like risks that was mentioned in the second speaker? You see, there's a lot less likely on your side. Right, going into my clash, right? Which side? helps minorities better. So that side provides no counterfactual, and this is why this debate ends up being very confusing. The only thing that they tell us is that they maximize human autonomy, the point at which minorities can change whenever they want to. This is premised upon the idea that people must reject their fate in order to succeed. Yes, we agree. But minorities on our side are more likely to be able to defy the social structures that oppress them, because we've already proved how poorer people in opposition feel things like burnout. They never responded to this. How they feel that suffering is really unfair and therefore really sad. They develop this thing like an inferiority complex because their social structures, they feel as if these social structures inherently inhibit them. They feel very disenfranchised. In this case, their morale is very low. They don't really do anything to try to help themselves because they themselves already buy into the idea that they are incredibly helpless, their suffering is really sad, and they just inherently experience more suffering than other people. However, on our side, when we promote suffering as something that is necessary, something that actually most people experience, this is where poor people are less likely to feel super disenfranchised and super different from everyone else and super excluded in society. And this is when minorities on our side will actually be able to view themselves as a person in the social structure, view themselves as someone that actually has the capacity to move up the social ladder, not someone that's constantly entrenched inside their position that they're currently in. But we see that both sides, people already believe in fate, but their side hates fate. So therefore, both sides believe in the idea that fate, that things are set up for you to follow, how social structures inhabit you. However, people on their side start to hate the idea of fate. Therefore, people feel very disenfranchised, feel very helpless, and therefore, these poor people on their side are likely to put the idea of success very, very far away from them. Therefore, they perceive this idea of success as something that's very unattainable, something that's very lofty, and even if no matter how motivated they get, as long as this idea of suffering is, as long as this idea of success is put very far away from them, it's ultimately something that they'll never be able to achieve. On our side, the point at which we view that every single suffering, every single thing that you experience is a stepping stone that brings this idea of success closer to you. This is when the way that we view failure, the way that we view success is already something that's drastically changed, therefore something that's incredibly important in places that have historically very low morale. This is something that we brought to you in Joanne, how actually a lot of minorities that have been historically disenfranchised feel very set back and already starting off on the wrong scaffolding, on the wrong foot, the point at which they are born into this. Yeah, sure.
Why do minorities firstly need to accept and live through a life with oppression so they can get change rather than believing that this isn't right and not accept it and seek change now?
Sorry, I don't understand that. Okay, no, I don't have time for you to repeat that, but I'm gonna just move on, right? So, okay, then they come and tell us that they people on outside are less likely to take risks. We see that, as I've mentioned this before, on our side, we actually reframe the way that people perceive failure. So that means people perceive failure as something that's supposed to actively help you rather than something that's actually supposed to set you behind. So therefore, the way that we perceive the idea of failure is really very different. That's like whenever someone fails, whenever someone suffers, they see that as themselves being actively set back behind a step. In that case, it makes them already feel inherently set themselves behind and set themselves up for failure because they inherently already inhibit themselves from pursuing anything greater. The point at which they realize that, okay, there's probably not as much point, or I need to do like 10 these things, like 10 things, work 10 times harder in order for me to get the same amount of benefits, because suffering is just something that's so bad. But when our side, we normalize suffering using our wording. We portray suffering as something that's necessary in order for you to succeed, in order for you to do better, in order for you to grow. This is when people don't view suffering as something that inherently sets you back. Then that side comes out and talks to us in second speaker about the idea of climate change, about how this philosophy, or about how now people don't really view things like climate change as something that we need to solve because it's something that is necessary in society, something that's supposed to be good for society. We see that this philosophy, firstly, is a bit odd, considering we see that things like climate change, things like global warming are inherently bad things that we just cannot deny. And we see that these also, secondly, this philosophy works to target events that have passed. So they do not hinder future progressions. We only reframe people's mindsets towards events that have passed, not possible future developments. Because we now view these post events, things like failure, as necessary, because the only way you can view failure as something that's necessary is if you have experienced that failure, meaning that failure has passed. We see that therefore when they bring up this idea that future developments will now be hindered is something that does not link to what their side is talking about. So the unique benefit that we prove on our side is that we boost morale. Their side really likes to talk about this idea about how they defy fate, but then their side does not provide any form of mechanisms as to how they intend to do this. On our side, we prove to you that we actually increase morale. Therefore, it's a lot more likely that people on our side will want to defy fate because they view failure and success in a very different way. With this, please go with government. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Government Whip. I now invite Opposition Whip.
Hello, am I audible? Oh wait. Oh, my cam is like vertical. I don't know how to fix that. Yeah, I don't think I can fix that. So I'll just leave it as is. Be wiser through voice. And yeah, pronouns are his session. Cool. Yeah, I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Don't believe government side when they say that we don't have a counterfactual. We gave you a very clear counterfactual, and we'll explain it again. The first is we reject evil in and of itself and reject suffering. With that is to say, we're able to reject things that are bad for these individuals because it's something that stops them from attaining autonomy or attaining what they want to do. But the second is we tell people to dream. We tell them to go things to dream of things beyond their circumstance, beyond their fate, and that's something that's very important to them. Don't believe that then that we don't have a counterfactual. It is very clear. What then are the main harms coming from their side? The first is they say that on our side, people are less likely to feel bad because now when you fail, it is something that's personal. We say on both sides, people are likely to fail, but I think that like it's unclear as to how you're more likely to feel bad because it's something that's personal. Because fine, we think that you may fail, but we tell you we reject that failure and we reject it. And insofar as we do reject it, I think that it's far better on our side because even if it is personal, you personally reject that kind of failure. So we say even if you do fail on our side, the difference is on their side, that kind of failure is something you accept within yourself, and that kind of failure is something that you would say is normal. On our side, we say that is not normal. We try to change that and we try to strive for better. Therefore, on our side, I think that it's just better. Like even if you may feel bad at first because you're able to attain things that are better. But what is the debate then about? I'll talk about two issues because I think that the principle was largely responded to by government side. The first issue is whether people are likely to be. Firstly, where like the where like matter like Fati
Points.
is something that's more likely to be like yeah where it's justified. And the second is I'll just talk about where people are more fulfilled. I'll take that point then.
Hi. Given that suffering and success go hand in hand with each other, do you reject success as well?
No, we don't reject success. Yeah, we don't reject it. We don't reject it. And we're also telling you we can get that success, and we don't have to like accept failure just to get it. That's why we're like telling principally this is something that you shouldn't do on their side. What is the importance of the first issue, and why is it principally unjust on their side? The first is we think that the importance of this is that opposition is just like doing things that are very consequential is to prove it. Which is to say, we explain that autonomy and there are like this like this philosophy is against their human dignity, but opposition tries to say this is a good thing because you're able to get things that are like pragmatically good. Firstly then it's just a lack of principle, right? We're able to explain to you this is something that's off clash, therefore even if you get some sort of like benefits on their side, it is something they still haven't proved why it is something that's justified. But the second is I'll prove why even if they do get some sort of benefit, like why it's why people are more motivated, it is still something that is unjust. Firstly, we think that the first point is very simple. They are motivated by things that are principally unjust first and foremost. We think that on their side, you have to wait for you to be abused. You have to wait for you to be traumatized, or you have to wait for yourself to, like for example, go through things that are terrible just to feel as if you're able to get success. We tell you that we reject that notion. We tell you that you shouldn't have to live like a terrible life, or you shouldn't have to suffer just to succeed in the first place, just to get motivation. Insofar as that's the case, the source of motivation on their side is unjust in and of itself because of the fact that they get it from places that are terrible, but from places that are just undermining the human dignity of people. But the second is, we tell you explicitly that in cases where it does like in cases where you do like feel motivated, right, and things like in cases where people do get like abused, in a lot of those cases, right, you have to relive the trauma that you have to like the trauma that you have to go through. Insofar as you try to accept it and assimilate it within their own life journey and story, we tell you that there's something that is terrible because in a lot of cases people are not likely to feel good and or feel good about what happened to them, or just comfortable talking about the way they were abused or they were oppressed. Insofar as that's the case, it is completely unjust for them to put it for people to put it and to for people to make it so that it is required in their journey for them to
Right.
suffer in the first place because of the fact that this is something that a lot of people do not want. People do not want to relive the trauma that they faced in the first place. We tell you we reject that. We tell you you shouldn't that whatever happened to you in the past or whatever bad thing happened to you in your past shouldn't dictate what happens to you in the future. That's exactly why we tell you that circumstance shouldn't equate to what you're able to do or what you're able to do in the future. So why is this principle important? We are able to explain to you firstly that it's completely unjust. Firstly, because it creates because you get the motivation on their side. At their very best case, you get motivation to things that are very unjust. But the second is, even if like maybe but the second is like, yeah, the second is that you just force individuals to relive things that are terrible for them, relive things that are just not good. So that's why principally it is unjust on their side. Even at their best case, when you like probably have like some sort of autonomy, we already did the weighing from PM. We think that yeah, from LO, we think that we already proved by this is something that's bad on their side. I'll take a second point. Yeah.
Hi. Given that everyone generally experiences suffering, do you think that people will feel more motivated because they can share their grievances and sufferings and therefore work hard together?
Okay, I'll deal with that with my second issue, where people are more fulfilled. Before I deal with it, I have two things to just talk about. The two main claims coming from their side is firstly, rich people are likely to donate more, therefore there's just net benefit. And the second claim on their side, people are more motivated then. I have just a few responses to this. The first is rich people are just have multiple incentives to donate. Therefore, this is something that's not likely to like just happen on their side. It's inexclusive because one, they would want to look better. Second, they want to dodge taxes. And three, right? It's just altruism. But the second point, they say people are likely to be more motivated. This is largely an assertion. I have three reasons because of this. The first is people feel like on their side, people feel like it is something that's normal. Yeah, they try to claim people are likely to move forward, but actually, if they accept the circumstances now, then obviously I think that it's harder for you to move forward because it is what you normalize or deem to yourself as something that's normal. Even if you may say that, oh, we will move forward and we will try to do something that's better, I don't really see how far you're likely to do that. You just say we will move forward. I don't see to what extent you will move forward. But the second, even if you don't believe that, people just derive people derive their hard work to what they can possibly attain to themselves or what they believe they can attain. But so on their side, when people are constantly suffering or when people are accepting that kind of environment, then obviously the hard work that they're going to put is only to the extent that they can believe that they can get to that point. So if they believe that they're suffering and they cannot attain things that are like far larger than their fate, then obviously the hard work they're able to do is less likely to be good. But the last thing is, even if you don't believe that, I think that on our side it is quite better because even if maybe they cannot attain completely their dreams, maybe they do not already become an astronaut, at the very least they go past what they were told by their fate. So maybe even if you aren't gonna become a billionaire, right, you can strive, you can like on our world become a millionaire or just be someone that is working, even if you're from minority. I'll weigh this now, right? Why is it then on our side? Why is it better? The first is right. Even we view something like we view suffering as something that we should reject. Note that risk does not equal suffering, right? So we can still take risks on our side, but we're just telling you that on our side, people are able to do things that they like want to do because of the fact that they feel like they can do it. But the second is we tell you like specifically on their side, you have to suffer first. On our side, we reject that, and even if you do suffer, people are likely to be like just do what they want to do because this is something that's inherent to their human nature. All these reasons and more. Proud to oppose. Thank you.
Thank you, opposition whip. I now invite opposition reply.
Hello, sorry, my earbuds are not working properly. Just to check, can I speak?
You're audible.
Okay, great, thank you. So, starting my speech then, in 3, 2, 1, go. Life is unique to all of us, and at the point at which you can't actually get what you personally want in your own life, and you have to accept every single thing that happens to you without your own consent, we tell you that life is not worth living. This is the life you are inevitably going to have to live on proposition side. Their entire case already succumbs to the biggest harm, and that's the fact that they have to suspect people into the narrative that you must fail to succeed. We tell you that people need to have the autonomy to tell you that is not true. We tell you that people need the motivation to want more, and they can't just settle for everything less that's going to happen to them. So what if people don't succeed? At least here in opposition, we're able to break that narrative. We tell you that's why we have to win this debate. A couple of things I want to point out then. Firstly, let's talk about the idea of where people more likely to become happier. We tell you that governments claim that these vulnerable actors don't have the leisure to these kinds of opportunities. But we think this type of happiness isn't absolute. This is why we can't really credit this. Because even if you're going to make people feel so much better about their terrible lives, they need this type of happiness over and over again. They're going to need to find pity. They're going to need to find so much solace in trying to accept what's happening to them. When in reality, they didn't consent to this in the first place. Let's look at the long term of their solution, right? They tell you that it's like they're just going to have to keep on accepting these things are going to happen to them. It's because they just don't have the opportunities and things like that. We tell you this is emotionally unjustified to make people go through a happiness cycle where they're going to feel something bad and then they're going to have to like be so then they're just going to try to accept it because they can't do anything about it. We want to break this cycle on opposition's world. Why? Because we believe that people deserve more. They deserve the autonomy that will make them have happier lives. And because of this change, because we promote the pro-action that's more likely to happen on our side, they're able to garner this happiness. This was the happiness that we actually want on our side. The happiness that we get is through the change that these people are able to actually give to themselves. What does this look like then? It looks like people being a lot much more happy on our side for the main fact that these people are choosing what they want to happen to them. This means then that if they don't want to be oppressed in society, they're going to stand up for themselves because they believe that it's not justified for them. Because they believe that these things are not like good for these people and for themselves, they're going to want a better life. And that's why they're going to be a lot much more happier when they know that they have tried every and exhausted every single option to themselves that makes them a lot much more happier. But even the greater extent of all of these things, we tell you these people do not deserve to just have to accept every single thing that's likely to happen to them. We can still concede to the fact that there are going to be times where people are going to suffer and like suffer through like the idea that they're going to have to fail. That's still true. That's not going to happen on either side. But I think the greater fact that's going to happen on ours is the idea that people are still going to be a lot much more happier in trying every single possible solution. In the idea that because they have done something, they can see this change happening in their lives. We see that's incredibly a lot much better. Let's actually point out what we put here in like this round winning for opposition side. I think firstly and foremost, it's the principle of autonomy. We think that it's far stronger on our side because autonomy equates to people being able to commit to change that they actually want, rather than just getting the like extremely manipulated like idea of autonomy from what their surroundings give you. We tell you this looks like people being a lot more proactive and like not having to like extremely find to suffer every single bad consequences before they can just like commit something that will make their life a lot much better. So let's go on to like why is the government's last point standing like incredibly just terrible then? Because we see that even if people are better, like who want to like believe that acceptance is going to be a lot much more better for them, we tell you it's an extremely bad band-aid solution into reaping the benefits that you get on our side. What are the benefits you get on our side? I think because of the pro-action that you're able to get on our side, it also means that people are more likely to be happier. But the idea then is that why is this so much worse on like on government side? We see the government side, they're just constantly going to have to keep accepting every single thing that happens to them. Meaning to say that no matter what's going to happen and like what is good or bad, they're just going to accept it as it is, as it was like fate that happened to them. But we tell you, at the point that they have to wait for things to happen to them, it also means at the same time that people are always and constantly going to think that they aren't worthy of these things. When reality, on opposition side, we tell you that's untrue. We want people to have like the pro-action to want to gain things. We want people to change their lives on their own hands rather than fate, which is something that have no metrics and no basis at all. We tell you for all these reasons, you have to oppose. Thanks.
All right. Thank you, Op reply. I now invite Gov reply.
Am I audible and visible?
Yes, you are.
All right. Firstly, a clarification. The suffering and oppression that people go through are already existing, and we are not telling them that they need to go through the suffering as side opposition tried to bring out throughout their speech. In my first speaker speech, I already told you that our case happens in status quo, at the point that people are born into sufferings or inevitably face it in life, and we need this narrative because suffering poses the problem that people in status quo cannot stand up from these challenges and cannot improve their lives, which is why on our side, we send out a narrative that changes this and turns their suffering into motivation to solve this issue. On top of that, opposition already misunderstood our case from the get-go. I presented a clarification in my first speaker speech that Amor Fati does not look like them thinking that the suffering itself is good and they should remain in suffering, but rather that they acknowledge that the suffering itself is bad, but in the grand scheme of things, it's good. Our side had three things that we were proving in this debate. Firstly, vulnerable groups are better protected. Secondly, wealthy people are more likely to help, which was largely unresponded to. And thirdly, we increase motivation. Panel, the bulk of their case is premised on autonomy. Notice that their argument on motivation is also contingent on autonomy. And therefore, as long as we prove that one, we also have autonomy, and two, autonomy is what's on their side, we already win this debate because their case is filled with holes and contradictions. I'll be proving autonomy. In today's debate, I would like to point out 3 deadly contradictions. Firstly, I think that by their whip, they already have a case shift. They start by saying that suffering is bad and draw the fine line in third that they want to reject suffering as a whole. I think that this is a fatal contradiction on their case because we told you that a lot of things related to motivation and change is related to suffering. Thanks to them, we have thus lowered our burden to just defend that suffering is important. So in second, we told you that women would not be emancipated if they did not believe in suffering. Panel, logically speaking, you have to buy that some amount of suffering exists because if there is no problem, then what are people fighting for? This also means that they themselves know the whole case because they told us previously that you need to fail to succeed. Failure is suffering, and they never drew the distinction. I think that they already killed their whole case. This also means that they go against their main point of autonomy. This is extremely unstrategic because as opposition team, their unique benefit is that people recognize suffering as bad. By rejecting suffering, they devalue suffering as well as trading off any form of minority welfare. Furthermore, if they reject suffering, how then do they intend to criticize the oppressive social structures if they devalue historical suffering? But we tell you that autonomy also exists on our side more. They cannot possibly limit this debate to suffering. We tell you that good things are also viewed as necessary on our side because this is important because it promotes the narrative that even if suffering exists, good things will definitely come in the future. Autonomy is actually pretty tied to motivation, right? To have the option to do things and have motivation to achieve success, you need motivation. Here is opposition's second contradiction. They cannot defend that people have the autonomy while simultaneously right that they can get the change for the historical racism and discrimination that vulnerable groups have faced. We told you down the line that suffering not to be seen as necessary, you therefore have to discredit and delegitimize any suffering that vulnerable groups face because it therefore justifies racism and discrimination as fake. This directly deals with their original case because the case shift and that note that they have never actually responded to our argument of wealthy people, so this argument still stands. So we actually gave you a bunch of structural reasons as to why autonomy is better on our side. Firstly, the difference on our side, the difference between necessary suffering and opposition is that suffering is a stepping stone on our side. Secondly, that this is their third contradiction. We told you about trauma right from the first. Opposition cannot reject suffering because this also rejects trauma. This takes away autonomy from people that they feel they no longer have the ability to stand up for themselves and seek help. But I think that they also concede that suffering is not a bad thing. They gave us the example of a pregnant woman in Elo and they themselves say that the suffering is before birth a positive thing usually. So given that suffering activity exists, and we prove that we are better able to boost the morale of people, we give minorities and the poor hope, reduce burnout, people accept their failures, and because of this, we achieve that end goal. We better protect vulnerable groups, create more change, and increase motivation. We take this debate. Thank you.
All right, thank you everyone for the amazing debate.